Tonight, Ontario's going to the polls. Despite a year plus left in his government's majority, Doug Ford says he needs a mandate.
We need a mandate from the people to fight against Donald Trump's tariffs.
Will the ballot question be Ford or Trump? We're unwrapping meat prices at some big grocers.
It's the government's responsibility to verify compliance.
Are you getting what you're paying for? The professional tenants giving renters a bad name.
She smiled at me, this big Cheshire grin, and she said, "We're not going anywhere."
Refusing to leave, refusing to pay, abusing the system. Our investigation.
From CBC News, this is The National with Erica Johnson.
Thanks for joining us. Ontario's premier has been front and center in the political pushback against Donald Trump's tariff threats. Now, Doug Ford says that fight is exactly why he needs to trigger an early election. It's one more example of the pressure American politics is exerting right now on this country. Ford says the election call is coming next week, meaning a vote could be held at the end of next month. He's seeking a new, bigger mandate, despite his majority government having almost a year and a half left in its current one. Kate McKenna with his pitch and the response from opposition parties.
Doug Ford made it official.
We will be calling the election next Wednesday.
After months of speculation, he'll trigger a snap election more than a year early, likely sending Ontario residents to the polls on February 27th. He says he wants a mandate to fight Donald Trump's tariff threat.
I will do whatever it takes to protect the people of Ontario, in turn, because we're the engine of Canada, protecting all Canadians. We will not back down.
But some say this is really just opportunism. Ford has been one of the most visible politicians pushing back against Trump, and he's polling well.
Doug Ford is seen more positively by more people than negatively, and that's rare to find in any political leader anywhere in the world these days.
Plus, the RCMP hasn't finished its criminal investigation into his government's decision to open protected lands for development.
I'd like to wait to see the RCMP report finished on the Greenbelt scandal before he calls an election. I think he's rushing it to get that done beforehand.
Do you think it's a good idea?
Me personally, no, but they're going to do what they're going to do.
The opposition parties say it's go time.
Well, Mr. Ford wants to call a snap election. All right, bring it on. I'll be ready.
People should be very cynical on the timing of this election, but the Liberal Party has been preparing, and we are ready to go.
And they say this election will be about more than Donald Trump.
2.5 million people don't have access to a family doctor. He said he'd get it done, and he didn't get it done.
Ontarians have never had a tougher time. The cost of everything is through the roof. Housing, groceries, people are stuck in traffic.
There's another figure looming large in this election, Justin Trudeau. The timing allows Ford to contrast himself to Trudeau and the unpopular carbon tax before the Prime Minister steps down on March 9th. Kate McKenna, CBC News, Ottawa.
Donald Trump's promised immigration crackdown appears to be well underway, with raids and deportations happening. And as Paul Hunter shows us, for some, that's sparking fear and anger.
Here they come. Security video and what appears to be the tail end of the raid. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents with one of the men apprehended at a seafood depot in Newark, New Jersey. A clear signal U.S. President Donald Trump's long-promised deportations of undocumented migrants in this country are underway. But in New Jersey, fury.
None of these people were rapists or murderers or criminals.
The mayor of Newark, whose city is pledged to protect migrants, underlined there was no warning, no warrant.
We believe that there were 3 people who they say were undocumented that they detained, but they also detained folks that were, in fact, citizens of this country. One person showed their military veteran identification and was still questioned anyway.
People are scared. ICE walked in like it was their empire's own conquered land. They were heavily armed. There was no prior announcement. They were blocking off entrances and exits. They were scrambling up delivery ramps. They were banging down bathroom doors to make sure no one was hiding inside.
And it's by no means just New Jersey. These images released by the U.S. Defense Department show migrants being deported from Arizona. The White House earlier released these photos of a deportation underway in Texas. This video shows those same migrants hours later in Guatemala. And while the Joe Biden administration also deported nearly 300,000 such migrants last year alone, Trump has suggested all 11 million in America are now targets, though insisting again these first raids are aimed at criminals.
These are murderers. These are people that have been as bad as you get, as bad as anybody you've seen. We're taking them out first. Thank you. Thank you.
And one other note on this, Erica, reports late this week Mexico was the destination for another military plane load of deportees, but the Mexican government refused the U.S. permission for it to land in Mexico.
And Paul, Trump himself, as we saw, was in North Carolina today, where people are still recovering from September's Hurricane Helene.
Yeah, and while there, another headline. Trump suggesting he may get rid of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, the federal group that brings aid to Americans after natural disasters like Helene. Trump said individual states could deal with disasters on their own and then apply for some reimbursement from the feds. It'd be cheaper and faster, he said.
All right, thanks for that, Paul. Paul Hunter in Washington tonight. Amazon says it is happy to have a discussion with Canadian officials over its decision to shut down all of its warehouses in Quebec. The industry minister says he will fight to make sure the move does not go unanswered.
I'm not going to tell them what I'm going to do in advance. That's called negotiation 101. Let them reconsider. Let them figure out what we might do as a review.
The federal government is now reviewing its own business relationship with Amazon. It's signed more than 200 contracts with the company since 2020, some worth several $1 million. A barrage of drone attacks between Ukraine and Russia has both sides reeling tonight. That's the backdrop as Russia's Vladimir Putin begins a diplomatic dance around possible peace talks with the newly installed U.S. president. Briar Stewart has the latest on all fronts.
The aftermath of another Russian strike. A drone hit this 10-story building, incinerating entire apartments. At least 3 were killed in the Kyiv region. Ukrainian cities remain under attack, and so does Russia's energy industry. Engulfed in flames, an oil refinery southeast of Moscow, one of a number of sites targeted by Ukrainian drones. While the war continues to be waged in the air and on the ground, U.S. President Donald Trump said he's ready to talk to Russia's leader, Vladimir Putin, immediately. And if he refuses to negotiate, Trump threatened to levy more sanctions and tariffs on Moscow. I doubt that Trump will make such decisions that will harm the American economy, said Putin in response. He's not only a smart man, he's a pragmatic man. In an interview with Fox News, Trump didn't say how he proposed ending the war, but he had some pointed criticism for Ukraine's leader.
Zelensky, I will say this, he wants to settle now. He's had enough. He shouldn't have allowed this to happen either. No. You know, if he's no angel, he shouldn't have allowed this war to happen.
It's been going on now for nearly 3 years, and that's how long Calgarian Paul Hughes has been here, volunteering and helping to deliver aid. At this warehouse in Kharkiv, he and others are unloading a truck full of donations from France.
The Ukrainian people encourage peace. It's just at what cost? You know, so somebody comes into your house and takes over your bedroom and your bathroom and your carport, and you're just going to say, okay, we're going to live together now, and that's okay to come into my house and take these things?
Ukraine says that it needs security guarantees to make sure that if there is a peace deal, that Russia doesn't turn around and invade again in a few years. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Kharkiv, Ukraine.
Anticipation is growing in Israel tonight after Hamas released the names of 4 hostages it has pledged to set free tomorrow.
It's a dream come true for everybody in Israel. We are all one family, so they're part of my family.
The 4 women will be exchanged for dozens of Palestinians held by Israel. The fragile ceasefire is holding in Gaza, even as Israel hunts the West Bank for Palestinian militants it says are backed by Iran. A drone strike today killed 2 people. In Gaza, Palestinians say the flow of aid is welcome, but it needs to come faster. Chris Brown shows us striking views of the war-torn region and one family's desperate search for their dead son's remains. A warning, some images may disturb you.
Amid Gaza's hellscape and with the ceasefire quieting Israeli bombs, Ashraf Zakut and his daughter Islam have returned to what used to be their home in Rafah, searching for the body of Mahmoud, his son, her brother. He refused to displace, she said. He insisted on staying here. He said, "This is my place, my country, and I won't leave it." Heavy equipment to move the immense debris is scarce, so it's slow progress. Friends said it was 6 months ago that Mahmoud, an engineering student, was in the family's house as Israel attacked the neighborhood. Of course, I'm upset and very sad, but we hope to find him so we can bury him and he can rest, said his father. He was studying for his master's and wanted to continue to do a PhD, said Islam. He had goals and dreams, but the war started and stopped everything. As many as 10,000 bodies may be under the rubble. Gaza's death toll is already 47,000 and counting. Nearby, another family with another desperate search discovers the worst. Human remains of a missing relative, the ID in his clothes confirming his identity. As those in Gaza conduct painful searches, with the ceasefire, Israelis are coming to observe the impact of 15 months of war on the territory next door. This is Sderot, where Hamas gunmen killed dozens on October the 7th. This lookout peers right out over northern Gaza, and it gives Israelis a clear view of the vast destruction. Yisrael Simchan told us once the remaining hostages are returned, he wants the war to resume.
We're not finished the job yet.
And to finish the job means more
destroy all the buildings of the terrorists.
There's not much left to be destroyed. The search for Mahmoud's body turns up nothing, but they'll keep looking. He was Zakwat's second son to be killed in the war, but in that case, his family had a body to bury and a place to grieve. Chris Brown, CBC News, in Sderot, Israel.
In Ireland, officials warn it may take up to a week to restore power to parts of the country after Storm Eowyn tore through. At one point, Ireland's weather agency clocked a wind gust of 183 kilometers per hour, breaking a previous record set in 1945. One man was killed when a tree fell on his car. Eowyn shut schools and grounded more than 1,000 flights across the British Isles. Today marked 6 months since wildfire ripped through the Alberta resort town of Jasper. As the community tries to rebuild, temporary housing is a key element. Julia Wong shows us how a political stalemate is leaving residents in limbo.
We'll pull up this couch.
Space is tight inside this one-bedroom hotel suite for Diana Donat's family of 4. To make it work, she and her husband sleep on a sofa bed while
my kids sleep here in this bedroom.
Life here is different than in Donat's 5-bedroom house that burned down during the wildfire.
It's not easy, especially with all these hockey bags and everything. I mean, with the cat.
Her family was supposed to move out of the hotel and into temporary housing promised by the Alberta government in October. But now that may not happen, and she has to be out of the hotel by the end of April.
Where will your family go?
I don't know. I don't know.
Parks Canada set aside 4 parcels of land for temporary housing.
Everything's been roughed in.
That's correct, yes.
So then the only thing really that's needed for this site to get up and running is?
For the houses to arrive.
But there's a problem. The province offered roughly $100 million to build permanent single detached houses, but the town says there's only room for 60 of those units. It wants high-density interim housing for more than 600 households.
It is a simple question of math. We are trying to bring as many units of housing to house as many displaced Jasperites as we can.
The Alberta government says more land should be made available, but Parks Canada says changing town boundaries is complicated and time-consuming. The province isn't budging from its position for single-family homes.
If we don't have a project that meets those requirements, then this money can't be spent.
What I like about this place is the view.
That puts Danette and her family in a tough position.
We just need help to bridge this gap and rebuild our, stability.
Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault says he's working with Parks Canada and focused on building interim housing. He says he wants to collaborate with the Alberta government. The town says it remains open to talks, but right now it isn't clear what it will take to break the stalemate. Julia Wong, CBC News, Jasper, Alberta.
Police in Orillia, Ontario have charged a 35-year-old man with arson days after fire gutted an historic building. It had stood on this downtown street for 142 years and was home to several businesses. The owner told CBC News the damage was too extensive to salvage the facade, and what remains is now being demolished. Police say they examined security camera records to identify the suspect, who is also charged with disregard for human life. Monday marks 80 years since the liberation of the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz. Canada's Prime Minister will travel to Poland, but tonight, Nicole Williams brings us the story of one survivor in Ottawa.
In a room full of dignitaries, David Moskovic shares his story of surviving Auschwitz.
That whole day, there was snow there, and dead people all over the place. I saw one of my uncles.
Now 95, Moskovic was only 14 years old when he was brought to the notorious death camp from then Czechoslovakia.
My mom went straight to the gas chamber, of course, which we didn't know.
6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust, approximately half of them at Auschwitz. On the day it was liberated, just 7,000 survivors.
The Holocaust was not an inevitability. It was the culmination of a long history of prejudice and discrimination.
Moskovic eventually made his way to Canada and started a family.
I used to think of my Zeta's life was like a history book.
His granddaughter says stories like his are more important than ever, with symbols of anti-Semitism on proud display.
On January 6th, 2021, watching the mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol, I saw a man wearing a dark hoodie with a skull, crossbones and large white letters on it that said, "Camp Auschwitz, work brings freedom."
Moskovic himself disturbed by what he saw the day of U.S. President Donald Trump's inauguration.
Thank you.
Elon Musk giving what many think was a Nazi salute, something Musk has dismissed.
I never thought in my life I would ever see this again, especially such an important guy like him, the wealthiest man in the world.
Other members of the Jewish community saying Canadians should be paying attention.
We can never tolerate fire bombings of synagogues, gunfire targeting Jewish schools, students being harassed in schools or at universities.
As of 2 years ago, there were fewer than 6,000 Holocaust survivors left in Canada. And as those numbers continue to dwindle, their stories become all the more precious. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Ottawa.
Calls for accountability grow after major grocery chains are exposed overcharging customers.
They're not worried about being caught, and they're not concerned about the consequences.
A follow-up to a CBC News investigation into the sale of underweighted meat. Dashing around daycares, are children getting the physical activity they need?
Oftentimes these childcare centers don't have tons of space for kids to be running around indoors.
New warnings about sedentary preschoolers. And terrifying moments for a BC base jumper left dangling high up on a cliff face.
In the first few minutes, I was very scared to move or even look up.
We're back in 2. More help is on the way to free a massive Canadian freighter still stuck in Lake Erie. This U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker has been trying to clear a path since Thursday, and by the weekend, 2 others will arrive. The Manitoulin became trapped in unusually thick ice after offloading a shipment of wheat. Those aboard are safe and in good health. More consumers are speaking out tonight after being overcharged for underweighted meat. As Sophia Harris tells us, some are taking their demands for accountability to the courts.
Okay. Weigh
away the chicken.
A recent CBC News investigation uncovered Loblaw, Sobeys, and Walmart stores selling underweighted meat.
Okay.
Based on a tip from a shopper, CBC found more at this Sobeys-owned store. We bought 3 packs of ground beef. They appear to have been weighed with the packaging, which violates federal regulations. Calculated overcharge, 6%. In an email, Sobeys thanked CBC for bringing this to the grocer's attention and said it has reinforced its procedures and policies related to meat weighing.
They're not paying more attention to this stuff. This is their business.
In 2023, another shopper, Iris Griffin, complained to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency about underweighted beef bought at a Loblaw-owned superstore in Winnipeg. Turns out the error occurred at 80 locations. Griffin's unhappy the CFIA issued no penalties in that case, which is typical. So you have a copy of the proposed class action there? But Griffin is happy about a new proposed class action lawsuit. It alleges Loblaw, Sobeys, and Walmart misrepresented the weight of meat products and overcharged shoppers.
It gives people a sense that something is being done and that the retailer is being held accountable for the money that they've taken from consumers.
Sobeys and Loblaw didn't comment on the lawsuit. Walmart said a third party sold underweighted meat at this one store for 2 weeks this past December. But a customer at that store complained about the problem on social media back in October, 2 months earlier. Walmart says it's investigating.
It's the government's responsibility to verify compliance.
This consumer advocate says the CFIA needs to penalize grocers which break the rules.
It's beyond me that they don't take more enforcement, and heavier enforcement also sends a message.
How much would it cost them?
The federal NDP has sent a message to Canada's Competition Bureau, asking it to hold these giant corporations accountable. The CFIA says it issues fines when appropriate. And following CBC's investigation, the agency launched a new website about how to report and spot misweighed food. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Vancouver.
Some Ontario landlords are sharing horror stories about abusive tenants.
We work hard for this property, and this was supposed to be our family home.
The professional tenants who know the system and work the loopholes. And banned by sanctions, Russian oil continues to flow into Canada.
With those tax revenues, we estimate that over 3,200 new recruits could be employed by the Russian state.
Tracking Russia's petroleum-filled shadow fleet, The National breaks down the stories shaping your world. Next.
When you take care of your animals, you're taking care of yourself too.
New Yorkers may soon be able to take paid time off to take care of their pets. The city's council is considering a bill to allow workers to use their pre-existing sick days to do things like bring their pup to the vet. If passed, the proposal would become law next month. Toddlers in daycares are not moving as much as they should, spending more than 40 minutes every hour sitting. That's according to a new study by Western University. Deanna Sumanek-Johnson on the risks and solutions to get kids active.
What did you make there? It's so big.
On this frigid January day, these toddlers will have to have their fun indoors. But on most other days, their daycare teachers take them outside.
They're going to try to climb the bleachers and jump off the top. They're going to try to climb the tree. It's back to the things, I think, that we did as we were kids.
It's something that, according to a new survey, is not happening nearly enough. Research by Western University academics shows that preschoolers spend a lot of time sitting, more than 40 minutes out of every hour while in childcare. Yet the benefits of vigorous activity for young kids are many, both physical and psychological, says the study's co-author.
Things like motor skill development, so that's children being able to use and move objects as well as move their bodies. But it's also associated with the fitness and bone health.
There's something always different. It's all about striking a balance between that physical activity and hitting those literacy and numeracy benchmarks during traditional circle time.
Childcare centers don't have tons of space for kids to be running around indoors. And so oftentimes, we might see educators trying to control behaviors inside to try and minimize, the chaos of the room if kids are running around and being crazy. And of course, totally understandable.
Movement behaviors in the early years. She has developed an online course that incorporates more movement into children's days. It shows how to use small spaces and how to deal with very cold days.
If we're setting up
little stations or obstacle courses for the kids to explore. We can really get them moving, and that just makes me feel good in my heart.
As the move away from screens and towards a more active, healthy life gets an early start. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Now it's time to dig deeper into the stories shaping our world. Banned Russian oil worth millions is ending up in Canada. A CBC investigation tracks the shadow fleets that bring it here.
With those tax revenues earned by Russia, we estimate that over 3,200 new recruits could be employed by the Russian state.
How they're evading sanctions to help fuel Russia's war. But first, a pair of Ottawa tenants has left a trail of unpaid landlords and homes in ruins.
She knew the system.
$100,000 in unpaid rent to 4 different landlords. They got away with it for years. CBC's Robin Miller found out how they do it and met the property owners picking up the pieces.
It's intentional. I'm not the only one she's done it to. There's another landlord, the landlord before me, and the landlord before that, and the landlord before that landlord.
She was totally destroyed the house.
What is that? This was supposed to be our family home.
There are tenants that are educated about the procedures and the delays, and they definitely use them for their advantage.
4 times makes me very suspicious that there is something more going on.
Clearly she was a professional. She smiled at me, this big Cheshire grin, and she said, "We're not going anywhere."
I'm Robin Miller in Orleans, a suburb here in Ottawa, where over a period of 4 years, 4 different landlords say they've all fallen victim to the same professional tenants. The term is used to describe a person who knows how Ontario's landlord-tenant board system works. They know it so well they can use it to avoid paying rent. And that's exactly what the landlord says happened here. She's still in the process of fixing up this house, but we joined her minutes after she first got the property back.
So this is the house.
This is Adrienne Salter. She and her sister bought this house in Orleans back in 2018. The home held many happy memories, moments now faded.
I did my traditional wedding right here in this living room, but now looking at it, it's not the happy memories we once shared here. Because we worked hard for this property, and this was supposed to be our family home. My dad is here, he's retired, this is where he was supposed to stay. My sister is coming here with her family, this is where they're supposed to stay.
Salter takes in the dirt, the damage, and the lingering smell the last tenants left behind.
What is that? What is that? I'm disturbed, I'm grossed out. And that was, I can't believe this is the place I used to live. This was my family home. And now it just smells like a zoo. Even a zoo smells better.
She says she's exasperated, worn down after a long battle with her tenants. The couple moved in August 2023. Salter got the property back on September 10th, 2024. Salter says they owe her about $35,000 in unpaid rent.
Because it just feels like I was fighting a battle that was against me from the get-go.
Now, you may think you've heard this story before. Since the pandemic, the Landlord-Tenant Board is backed up, and we've done lots of stories about it. In 2023, for example, it took about 10 months to get a hearing for a non-payment of rent application. Things have improved a bit since then. Those hearings are now being heard usually within about 3 months. But what makes this story different is what Salter found out about her tenants shortly after they moved in.
It's intentional. I'm not the only one she's done it to. There's another landlord, the landlord before me, and the landlord before that, and the landlord before that landlord. So she's done it to 4 of us that we know of.
This was when we first met Salter this past spring. At that point, she was desperate to get her house back from the tenants, Megan and Justin. CBC is not using the couple's last names to prevent identifying their children who have had to move from home to home with them.
Hi, Megan. It's Robin Miller calling from CBC.
We've been in contact with Megan, but she said they didn't want to go on camera for an interview and didn't answer written requests for comment. She did, however, deny any allegations that they are professional tenants.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
My credit has gone down. I'm relying on credit to just pay, just so the bank will not take the house.
Salter claims her tenants knew what they were doing all along. So we looked into it and found that their previous landlords all had very similar experiences, dating back to July 2020, when they moved in here.
Miss Gina Kadane was renting out his house to make some extra money. He was living at his friend's house, waiting for his family to arrive in Canada from Sudan. Even though it was years ago, Kadane remembers the tenants like it was yesterday.
Megan and Jasper was living here for 1 year, 1 month, 15 days.
Keep in mind this was during the height of the pandemic. The first temporary moratorium on residential evictions in Ontario was just lifted in August, and the backlog at the LTB was massive. Kadane went to the tribunal but says he didn't have a hearing because he decided to pay the tenants to leave, a cash for keys exchange.
Someone live in your house, not pay, and they when I ask you, when she asked 5,000-6,000, that's so bad. I was sad because this is not fair. She was totally destroyed the house, so it's broken, and everything was not good.
He ended up paying them $3,200 to leave his property, which at the time wasn't that uncommon in light of all the delays. But we found out that pattern of unpaid rent continued.
This is Taylor and Janny Bastian. Megan and Justin moved into their home in the middle of August 2021. It was just a 7-minute drive from Kadane's house. The Bastians were working in British Columbia for the year and decided to rent out their family home.
It's like a wave of betrayal. Like, I trusted this woman to come into my home. I trusted her with some of the furniture I left. We seemed to bond a bit, even if she's a total stranger. She actually moved in the day, it was her birthday, her 30th birthday. So I had a birthday card for her. The experience of having her in my home has been the most horrible experience of my life.
The Bastians first noticed something was off when rent didn't come in. Taylor ended up coming back to town to repair something in the home and says he tried to end the tenancy then.
At this point, they were behind by $5,200 in rent at that point. That was 2 months. And I said, listen, we're willing to just let you walk away, right? We'll end the lease. She looked at me in the eye, and it's almost like she was laughing. She smiled at me, this big Cheshire grin. And she said, we're not going anywhere. So we're not going anywhere because I have a family member who worked at the LTB, and they're just going to make you negotiate with us. So if I move somewhere else, they're going to charge me just as much. So we're staying put. But I'll never forget it because clearly she was a professional, and she was well armed. She knew the system. She knew the name of every form, the number of every form.
It took the Bastians 1 year and 15 days to evict. They say Megan and Justin did pay back 6 months of rental arrears with the help of a provincial program. In the end, though, LTB documents say they are still owed nearly $11,000 in rent.
It was so dirty in here, it took 3 months to get the smell out after painting and replacing all the carpets, etc. So that was very much a personal attack on our home.
Yes, we win the last 6 months of rent, but there's no way to enforce it. So we haven't seen a penny.
To enforce orders from the LTB, you have to come to small claims court, and that's exactly what Megan and Justin's next landlord did. She had a similar experience where the tenants lived in her house, also in Orleans, for a year and stopped paying rent. A court order shows they owed more than $24,000 in arrears, and documents from small claims court say that Justin was ordered to have his wages garnished, but CBC wasn't able to confirm how much was repaid.
Here's what we know. Over a period of 4 years, this couple has lived at 4 separate homes, all in and around the Ottawa suburb of Orleans. In total, their landlords say they racked up nearly $100,000 in unpaid rent.
So how could this happen? 3 of the landlords we spoke to for this story say they were tricked, and there were flat-out lies in the rental applications.
When I spoke to this person, the name she gave me is Natalie. I'm sure that's a fake name. I should have mentioned the name, but I'm sure that's a fake name. Called the number. The landlord told me this is an awesome tenant. She has never been late on paying rent. She's amazing. That was all a lie. So I'm grateful that there's a website like Open Room now that landlords could go to.
Open Room is a website that aims to protect landlords and tenants by making LTB rulings easily searchable. The website's co-founder says when she hears about a repeat offender, she thinks professional tenant.
4 times, Robin. I can see one time. We have thousands of individuals in the system that have done it for one time, and I understand the one time there have been issues. 4 times makes me very suspicious that there is something more going on, that they do know how the system is working, that they're able to get away with it, and that there are no repercussions.
This paralegal says since the pandemic, the term professional tenant does come up more often.
There's many good tenants. I want to preface it by saying that. But there are tenants that are educated about the procedures and the delays, and they definitely use them for their advantage. For example, a tenant could not show up at a hearing. The landlord's waited, maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 months for the hearing, gets to the hearing, gets an order, a standard order for arrears of rent, and then the tenant can file a review saying that they were ill that day and they couldn't make it, or they never got the notice that day for the hearing. So then what happens is the order gets stayed and it gets set up for a new hearing, which could be another 2-3 months down the road.
Salter says that's exactly what happened to her. After waiting about 4 months for an LTB hearing, the tenants didn't show. An eviction was ordered 2 months later, but then stayed. The tenants argued they didn't know about the hearing.
But that is all false because I have proof, text messages where the tenant acknowledged that she knows about the hearing that's coming up in March. There's evidence that this tenant is a professional tenant. This stay should have never been granted.
When the next hearing came up, the LTB agreed with Salter. The stay was lifted, but that all took another 2 months.
She refused entry to change the filter.
I don't feel motivated mentally. I don't feel motivated emotionally. Like I've just lost faith in a lot of things and in people in general.
Salter says her insurance won't cover the damages and she's on the hook for nearly $40,000. That doesn't include the unpaid rent, the unpaid water bill, or the legal fees. In all, she estimates it's going to cost nearly $100,000, and she has no plans to ever rent this house out again.
Since that story was published, Robin and her team have been contacted by several landlords with professional tenants of their own. Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Russian oil is making its way into Canada, despite being outlawed by sanctions.
Quantities are so large coming in from Russia, a proportion of the products made will be from Russian origin.
How a legal loophole is keeping banned oil flowing. That's next. Moscow's stealth operation to get its outlawed oil to international markets.
When consumers in Canada are buying vehicle fuels or getting on flights, there is a high probability that a proportion of that could be made from Russian crude.
The loopholes exploited and the millions earned as Russia's oil flows to Western countries. Eric Zito has been tracking the routes of Russia's shadow fleets.
Russian oil is coming into Canada on tankers like this, despite widespread sanctions. Using trade data and satellite imagery to monitor marine traffic, our investigation tracks how hundreds of millions of dollars of Russian oil is finding its way into Canada, some with the help of Russia's shadow fleets.
When consumers in Canada are buying vehicle fuels or getting on flights, there is a high probability that a proportion of that could be made from Russian crude.
Let's map out how we got here. In February 2022, shortly after Russia invades Ukraine, Canada, the US, and UK put bans on all Russian crude and refined petroleum products. But years later, the Russian oil industry is still going strong, fueling Vladimir Putin's war, in part because of a loophole. Once these tankers carrying Russian crude end up in ports like this in India, they're mixed with other crudes and refined into things like jet fuel and gasoline, it then technically becomes a product of India, even if a portion of the oil is of Russian origin. So sanctions no longer apply. And since the start of the war, based on estimates by the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, Canada imported roughly 2.5 million barrels of Russian oil, worth about $250 million.
With those tax revenues earned by Russia from the sale of oil products to Canada, we estimate that over 3,200 new recruits could be employed by the Russian state. The Jamnagar refinery is the largest refinery in the world. After sanctions were implemented, it has completely shifted its supply chain towards Russia. Canada's imports of oil products coming from Jamnagar have increased around 35% in the most recent year of 2024 compared to pre-invasion levels of 2021. The quantities are so large coming in from Russia, a proportion of the products made will be from Russian origin molecules.
That same refinery, Jamnagar, also gets some of its oil from Russia's growing shadow fleet. The tankers are known to evade sanctions, fly under the flags of other nations, obscure their tracking signals, and launder oil by doing ship-to-ship transfers. Hundreds of these vessels have been sanctioned by the US and UK. Take the example of a shadow tanker named Legacy. In early September, the vessel is seen here as it's about to receive a crude shipment from the Ust-Luga port in Russia.
The tanker left the Russian port here of Ust-Luga. It took around 100,000 tons of Russian crude oil through the Baltic states.
Weeks later, on October 6th, in this satellite image, the Legacy is now near the service port for the Jamnagar refinery, about to unload that shipment. In the last half of 2024 alone, close to 80% of the oil that ends up in Jamnagar from Russia was via shadow tankers. India-based Reliance Industries, which owns Jamnagar refinery, did not respond to our requests for comment. From there, some of that Russian oil likely ends up in shipments like this. This is the Lilac Victoria. After leaving Jamnagar in December, it's carrying over 50,000 barrels of blending fuel en route to the Eowyn Point Tupper refinery in Nova Scotia. Eowyn said in a statement it stores liquid petroleum products for North American customers. It continually monitors and is committed to strict compliance with all applicable laws and regulatory obligations. That shipment by the Lilac Victoria is the most recent to Canada, but we flag 18 other tankers carrying shipments prior to that from Jamnagar and from this Turkish port that also uses Russian oil, arriving at refineries in Nova Scotia, at the Port of Montreal, near Quebec City. Millions of barrels of jet fuel and gasoline. SOCAR, the owner of the Turkish refinery, did not respond to our requests for comment. In January, the US sanctioned more Russian oil producers and shadow fleet tankers. It's not clear whether these new measures will affect the Russian war effort, though. We reached out to Global Affairs about our investigation and didn't get a response. While the amount of oil imported from Turkey and India is small compared to what we bring in from the US, it shows just how easy it is to get Russian oil into Canadian markets, despite far-reaching international sanctions.
This month, Washington imposed new large-scale sanctions against 2 major Russian oil companies and dozens of Moscow's shadow fleet. Up next, a base jumper dangles off a BC mountain.
In the first few minutes, I was very scared to move or even look up.
The terrifying predicament in our moment. It may be hard to see, but you're looking at an image of a base jumper in Squamish, BC, stranded on the cliff face, waiting for help. Luckily, she was brought down to safety with no major injuries. And tonight, the hair-raising rescue makes our moment.
As soon as I pushed off the cliff and I opened my parachute, my canopy opened in 180 line twist. I hit a wall a few times. I was pretty much just waiting for that final impact that was gonna either kill me or break all my bones, until I came to a complete stop. In the first few minutes, I was very scared to move or even look up, but I knew that my chute got caught in a rock or a tree or something, and that saved my life. I made a call very quickly. The SAR team got dropped by a helicopter. They had to set up a two-way rigging system to basically lower somebody down that would get to me. Grateful for all of them to organize such an efficient rescue and get me down safe. I'm probably gonna get back into base jumping. It's just kind of the matter of time of when.
And apparently she was dangling for a few hours. If you're wondering why they didn't use a helicopter for the rescue, they were worried that the draft from the propellers would fill her parachute and cause her to shift in position. Very risky, and glad to see that she is safe and sound. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Erica Johnson. Take care.